It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Okay, Kylie, so you know how last week we had a chat about the doctor's desk. We went through some really great scientific studies, some stuff that relates to parents and how we can be better parents. Do you remember that?
I do.
You know how we do that once a month?
I feel like you're about to tell me you're going to cheat.
Two studies have popped up on my desk that I don't want to wait to talk about. They're just too good. You're
going to squeeze another doctor's desk in.
It's not actually a doctor's desk episode. We're going to talk, though, about how screens are ruining our lives. Sorry, that was a lot, wasn't it? I know that I make a lot of noise about screens and kids. And we've got this great website, unpluggedchildhood.org, where we're encouraging every parent to get on there, sign the pledge, keep kids off social media until the end of primary school at a minimum, delay their access to smartphones. I mean, there's so much there. Unpluggedchildhood.org. We'll link to that in the show notes. But these two studies are highlighting a couple of other really important things about kids and their executive function, and their kids and their emotional regulation, and just the way we're using screens in our families. So it's a doctor's desk, but it's not. It's really a conversation about why we need to be better with our screens, and I'm leaning on two new studies to do that. Is that okay?
It's a doctor's desk.
It's a doctor's desk. But before we do that, I wanted to share something with you because it's something that it grabbed me, it captured me, and I thought, oh my goodness, every family needs to teach this to their kids. This was a TikTok that showed up, an Instagram that showed up from always.upper.elementary. This is a school teacher in the United States talking with her elementary school class about the way we respond to people's physical appearance. And she absolutely nails it. Have a listen to this.
If somebody can't change something about themselves in 30 seconds or less, then you shouldn't be mentioning it to them. If you say, hey, your shoe's untied, or hey, you have a little fuzzy on your shirt there, or if you say, hey, your pants are unzipped, I wanted to tell you privately because I didn't want you to feel embarrassed, but it happens to all of us. If you tell someone something like that, they can change those things in 30 seconds or less. But if you comment on someone's hair color or hair texture or hairstyle or body, they cannot change that in 30 seconds or less about themselves. Your words have power. If you say something that someone can't change in 30 seconds or less, you say those things. Try to fix it. You try to apologize. You try to take the words back. Take it back, take it back, take it back. And you try to undo what you said, undo what you did. But it's something they couldn't change about themselves, and so it's very messy. You can't totally take those words back. You can't totally fix it. Your words have power, and your words matter. If you walk out of this room spreading kindness to the people around you, spreading love to the people around you, that is what truly makes a difference.
No, isn't that great?
I love that.
I love that.
And what everyone else doesn't see is the visual of when she talks about when you say all of these things that people can't change. She's using a tube of toothpaste
yeah.
And she's squeezing it out as she talks about all of the different things you might say to somebody. And then when she talked about it being messy, it was like trying to, put it back inside the tube.
Yeah. So I know it's got nothing to do with what we're about to talk about, but it was so darn good that I had to share it.
It does from a social media point of view.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Okay.
We're constantly bombarded with things that are so harmful and hurtful to people. And in most cases, you probably wouldn't even think to say it in person.
I had a realization the other day when it comes to social media. And as you know, I've been off socials now for a couple of months, like just not even touching it. Don't even have the apps anymore. Don't log in. Don't know how to log in anymore. Lost my login. And it's perfect. I'm not going to do it. But I was thinking about the way socials work. And what I realized is that if somebody says something really inflammatory, outlandish, kind of crazy cuckoo, and we're at a barbecue or we're down at the beach hanging out with family and friends or whatever it is, or you're at a school function, wherever, at work. If somebody says something really outlandish, everyone looks at them funny and goes, going to avoid that person. Like, weird, not okay, just not okay. Maybe somebody might quietly try to pull them back into line in an appropriate way when people aren't watching or something. But when you do that on social media, the exact opposite happens. When you say that outlandish, crazy thing.
But you're not at a barbecue with your friends, and that's the difference.
Well,
once you're on social media, you're opening yourselves up to groups of people that you wouldn't normally choose to hang out with.
Beyond that, though, the algorithm amplifies those voices. It draws everyone in, and people feel compelled to get involved and have their opinions and blow up. And I think that's part of the loss of civility. It's messy. Anyway, so is toothpaste coming out of a tube. So is saying things about people's appearance that they can't change in 30 seconds. I just think it's a great rule. So when I see somebody, the last thing I want to say is, you look great, or haven't you done something, like commenting on people's appearance is just not what we do anymore, right? In 2024, we know better, and that's a perfect analogy as to why. Unless they can fix it in 30 seconds because they've got some lettuce in their teeth, don't say it. Don't say it.
Are you serious?
What do you mean?
You have to tell them if they've got lettuce in their teeth.
No, that's what I'm saying. If they've got that, then let them know, because they can fix that in 30 seconds or less. That's what a caring person does. But if they've gained weight, you don't say, "Oh, you're looking healthy." Like, that's just, let's move on. What I want to talk about with our non-Doctor's Desk episode is a couple of studies that have come out that really grabbed me. Brand new study, researchers in Canada and Hungary set out to examine the impact of what happens when you provide children a digital device or distraction so that you can avoid their big outbursts. Maybe it's in a shopping center or a restaurant, or even at home, like a digital pacifier, a digital dummy to stick in their mouth, so to speak. Researchers were looking at what happens with their emotion regulation over time. And
it works amazing in the moment.
And that's why everyone does it, right? Like kids screaming, give them the iPad.
Every parent would say it works amazing in the moment.
Yeah, what these researchers found, this was a research from Eötvös-Loránd University. They said this leads to more severe emotion regulation problems, specifically anger management problems later in life. Tantrums cannot be cured by digital devices. Children have to learn how to manage their negative emotions for themselves. They need the help of parents during this learning process, not the help of a digital device.
Well, it's a really intense form of distraction, right?
Yeah.
When our kids are little, one of the best tools we've used in the past has been to distract them when you can see that things are starting to build before they've got to that extent. But this actually marries up beautifully with the conversation we had the other day in relation to emotion regulation.
Yeah, regulated versus dysregulated kids just a couple of days ago.
They need us to model what it looks like to actually be able to regulate our emotions when we're feeling big emotions.
Let me tell you what they did in the study. They had about 300 parents with kids between 2 and 5 complete a child behaviour questionnaire. They did it once in their initial period, somewhere around about mid-2020. Then in mid-2021, the parents were surveyed again, and the final analysis pretty much said this: digital emotion regulation. When you give the kids the device, a year later, they display worse anger and frustration management skills. So within 12 months, if that's our standard way of doing things, they become more dysregulated, not better regulated. You get the quick fix, but you don't get the long-term results. And that's because the kids aren't learning they're not learning to switch on their executive function part of their brain. They're not learning things like delayed gratification. They're not learning how to tolerate frustration.
So the conversation we had the other day was literally parents are saying more and more that their children are dysregulated.
Yeah.
And based on what we're talking about today, I kind of feel like there's a pretty significant correlation between the increase of screen usage in homes and children's emotion regulation.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to deny that. I think the other thing is that as parents, we're struggling a lot with what I would call tolerable discomfort. So when our children become uncomfortable, we're not teaching them how to tolerate that limited amount of discomfort that they're experiencing, but also we're uncomfortable with the discomfort. So this idea of tolerable discomfort is something this is why people have ice baths, right? This is why people go out and exercise and push themselves, because they make themselves uncomfortable to a tolerable degree, and it builds your resilience. It helps you to manage difficult situations better. We know that there's all kinds of positive effects from doing these kinds of things, but it's not just physiological, it's also psychological.
But I think this is all a result of social media again as well, where as parents, we're literally watching the showreel of people's lives and seeing what we would call perfection in the making. And then we've got to try and copy that. We've got to try and meet that standard, and no one can.
You know what's funny about that? You talk to everybody. Literally everybody says, yeah, I know it's not real. I know it's a highlights reel. I know that it's a filtered, curated version of people's lives. Everyone gets that, and yet we still aspire toward it. There's something in our brain, something in our psychology that says, but I still want it, but it's still achievable, but it's still doable. And that's the great challenge. Anyway, that's the first study. I find it absolutely compelling, really, really interesting. It was published in Frontiers in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry just recently. And basically, children who are given devices more often when they have negative emotions and they're struggling with tantrums, they show less effortful control, defined as their ability to choose a deliberate response over an automatic one when they have subsequent negative or blow-up kind of emotions. Just so compelling, so fascinating, so important. If your kids are having a hard time, don't give them a smartphone. Don't give them a tablet. Don't give them the TV remote. Don't hand them the laptop. Instead,
give them a hug.
Give them a hug. And if they don't want a hug because they're too cranky, say, all right, well, what you're experiencing right now is called tolerable discomfort. I can tolerate it. And you can too. When you feel like a hug, come get one.
And every kid says, thanks, Dad, for explaining that to me.
Those two words, though, tolerable discomfort, they're really, really important. And they help kids to recognize that what they're going through is an emotion, and emotions come and they go, just like waves on the beach. They come up, they roll back out. I just love that study.
So what's the second study you wanted to talk about today?
So this one is some new research that shows why a very, very common approach to screen time may backfire. Number one, our screen time and our kids' screen time is linked. That is, the more time you spend on a device, the more likely it is that your kids will spend a similar amount or more on their device. Secondly, and this is the critical thing that came out of this study, I'm going to share all the results first and then talk a bit more about it. Using screens for rewards or punishment is associated with kids using screens more. And lastly, the researchers found that when we have much more thoughtful conversations around screens, kids set better priorities around their screen use. I just think it's fascinating. So this whole thing, if you don't clean up your room, you can't have a screen. If you don't do that thing, then there won't be an iPad. There won't be any gaming allowed. When you do that, if you get a good grade on your homework, you can have more time on the iPad. When you have these conversations with their kids, this recent study basically says, yeah, backfiring and going exactly the opposite direction that you want. There's a researcher at the University of California in San Francisco, Jason Nagata. He and his colleagues looked at a data set of over 10,000 12 and 13-year-olds and their parents to have a look at the link between how we use our screens, how kids use their screens, and what's going on with the whole reward thing. And what they found was the following. Number one, a couple of key parental factors were linked to tweens and teens being on screens more and using screens in problematic ways. These factors included, number one, how much parents were on screens. Number two, how much parents use screens at bedtime and at meals. And number three, how much parents use screens to control kids' behavior. Isn't that interesting? The more you're on a screen, the more you have screens in bed or at meals, the more your kids use their devices and use them in unhelpful ways. But the third one's the one that I want to focus on, and that is just using screens to control behavior is problematic.
Why is it that if you're going to use a screen as a reward, that would lead to more screen usage?
I think the best way to describe it is there's you know, Alfie Kohn. He wrote Punished by Rewards. He's one of the most influential people in my life in terms of having an impact on my early studies in psychology. And he describes it thus. He says, when we use rewards and punishment, what we're essentially saying is, if you do this, you'll get that. Do this and you'll get that. And it's the same whether it's a reward or a punishment.
Yeah, it's a positive reinforcement or a negative reinforcement.
Yeah, I can say do this again and you'll get that. Or I can say, if you do this, you'll get that. It's exactly the same thing. And then he asked the question, when you say do this and you'll get that, what are people thinking about? Are they thinking about the this or are they thinking about the that?
It's that.
Exactly.
The emphasis is on that.
Yeah. So if I say tidy up your bedroom and you can have a McHappy Meal, the kids aren't thinking about the bedroom, which is the valued activity. They're thinking about the McHappy Meal. Why? Well, because that's the thing that is...
We've just placed more value on that item.
Correct. We've elevated the value of the reward over and above the value of the thing that is...
Having a clean room.
Is actually valuable.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with screens. Whenever we're saying get good grades and you can have screens, tidy your room and you can X, Y, or Z, the more that we make screens the reward, the more we increase the perceived value of that activity. And we already know from a psychological point of view, the way that screens are designed and engineered, all of the psychological factors that go into it, they're already insanely compelling. They're already overwhelmingly rewarding. They're already the ultimate dopamine dump. And now we go and add another layer by putting it on a pedestal and making it the highest value activity that they can have once they've done all the other things that suddenly don't mean anything at all.
So what about the family, though, that literally uses it as a reward and it is only, used very sparingly?
I don't know that there's any family that does that. I just don't think that that's realistic in 2024. I can't imagine that there's a scenario where the screen is a valued reward and it barely ever comes out. The screens are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. I'm not sure that that's happening. Can you think of a time or a place where that's relevant?
Well, we did a episode a while back now, and J-Lo said that she only allowed her kids to use their screens on Fridays. That was their day.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. And so what happens is the kids hang out all week for their screen. I mean, they get on with things, they do whatever it is, but I bet your boots that on that Friday or the Sunday or whatever day it is that J-Lo and her kids get to hang out on screens, that's all they do. Like the kids would just be going, oh my goodness, I finally get it. And they're going to use a week's worth of screen time in a day. But more than that, I mean, just from a practical point of view, if you were to sit down with your kids and say, hey, what's your favorite memory of the past 7 days? What's the thing that you've enjoyed the very most in the last 7 days? No kid's going to look at you and say, oh, when we got to have that hour watching YouTube, oh, when I was allowed to stay up until 8:30 playing games, that was the best day of my life.
I reckon some of them would.
It's pretty unlikely. I'm going to downplay that one.
Someone would.
Research basically shows that when we use screens to reward kids, they use screens more. We will link to that in the show notes as well as the other study. I guess the take-home message from this conversation is kids do much better when they have minimal involvement with screens, when screens are not used as rewards and punishments, and when they're not used as pacifiers. The most important app, quote unquote app in our kids' lives is us, you and me as parents being present and involved. And the more that they can have us reading them rather than TikTok reading them. Like, I don't know if this is true or not, but I read the other day that TikTok actually gathers facial expressions as you're using the app to select which is going to be the next thing that shows up in the TikTok feed. Like this, the technology is just insane. We need to be reading them more than TikTok is reading them, and they're going to have much better lives as a result. Hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. It's a bit of a heavy one, really important one about minimizing screens in our kids' lives. Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. For more information about making your family happier, you can find us at happyfamilies.com.au.